On April 7, 1989, the roar of turbofan engines over New York's bustling skies fell silent for the first time in a century, as striking pilots and flight deck crews walked off the tarmac, sealing the fate of Eastern Airlines, once the pride of American aviation and a living relic of the golden age of air travel. Founded in 1926 as Pitcairn Aviation, the carrier that would become Eastern grew from a daring barn-storming outfit into a national icon, weaving its logo across the East Coast like a silver ribbon. By the 1940s, under the visionary leadership of Eddie Rickenbacker, a World War I ace-turned businessman, Eastern pioneered transcontinental routes, introduced the first in-flight meal service, and built a reputation for reliability that made it a household name. In the post-war boom, the airline expanded aggressively, acquiring new aircraft, launching the first jet service from New York to Miami, and establishing a massive hub at JFK International Airport. By the 1960s, Eastern was the third largest U.S. carrier, carrying millions of passengers each year, and employing a fiercely loyal workforce that wore their Eastern badge like a badge of honor. The 1970s brought both triumph and turbulence. Eastern became a pioneer of low-fare, high-frequency schedules, and its Eastern Express regional feeder network turned small towns into bustling gateways. Yet behind the glossy brochures, cracks were forming. The airline's rapid growth was financed by mounting debt, and its aging fleet required costly overhauls. In 1972, a hostile takeover attempt by the legendary Jack Welch of Texas International sparked a bitter boardroom war, forcing Eastern's management to adopt aggressive cost-cutting measures that sowed discontent among pilots, flight attendants, and maintenance crews. When deregulation swept the industry in 1978, the playing field shifted dramatically. New competitors entered with leaner cost structures, and Eastern's once comfortable market share began to erode. The airline responded with a series of ill-fated acquisitions, most notably the purchase of the beleaguered Texas International in 1981, adding more aircraft, more routes, and more financial liabilities. By the mid-1980s, Eastern was bleeding cash, its balance sheet a patchwork of high-interest loans and looming tax liabilities. The warning signs were unmistakable. In 1985, Eastern reported a $120 million loss, its first annual deficit in decades. Flight crews complained about chronic delays, aging airframes, and understaffed maintenance teams. The once celebrated Eastern brand, synonymous with reliability, began to be associated with cancellations and rust-colored fuselages. Yet the airline's top executives, emboldened by a culture of bravado, dismissed these concerns as temporary setbacks, confident that the carrier's storied legacy would weather any storm. The decisive moment came when the airline's pilots, represented by the Airline Pilots Association (ALPA), confronted Eastern's management over a proposed wage freeze and a controversial plan to outsource a significant portion of flight deck duties to a lower-cost contractor. After months of failed negotiations, the pilots voted to strike on March 31, 1989. The decision rippled through the industry. For the first time since the airline's inception, its iconic blue and white livery would not be seen soaring over the Atlantic. The strike was not merely a labor dispute. It was a battle for the soul of a legacy carrier. Eastern's management, led by the charismatic yet controversial CEO Frank Graham, declared a no-walkout policy, threatening to replace striking crew members with hired hand pilots and to ground the fleet indefinitely. The airline's financial reserves, already depleted, could not sustain a prolonged shutdown. Within weeks, the company faced mounting penalties from the Department of Transportation for failing to meet scheduled services, while creditors demanded immediate repayment. On April 7, 1989, with the strike still in effect and the airline's cash flow exhausted, Eastern filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. the first major U.S. airline to do so. The filing marked a watershed moment in aviation history, signaling that even the most venerable carriers were not immune to the brutal economics of a deregulated market. The strike, once a lever of negotiation, became the executioner of a century-old institution. The collapse unfolded with a stark, almost cinematic finality. By the summer of 1990, Eastern's remaining assets, its fleet of aging Boeing 727s and Airbus A310, were seized by the courts and auctioned off to rival carriers. The once bustling terminal at JFK, where generations of travelers had said goodbye to loved ones, stood eerily empty, its departure boards frozen on Eastern Airlines, flight canceled. Employees, many of whom had dedicated their entire careers to the airline, were left with severance checks that barely covered a month's rent. The strike's legacy extended beyond the balance sheet. It fractured a community, eroded trust in labor negotiations, and reshaped the airline industry's approach to union relations. In the years that followed, former Eastern pilots and flight attendants found new homes at major carriers, bringing with them a wealth of experience and a lingering sense of loss. The airline's former hubs, notably the once glittering terminal at Miami International, were repurposed, but the ghost of Eastern's iconic V still lingers in the memories of those who boarded its flights in the 1960s and 70s. The story of Eastern's downfall became a cautionary tale taught in business schools. Growth without sustainable financing, underestimation of labor power, and failure to adapt to a changing regulatory environment can topple even the most storied enterprises. Today, the Eastern name survives only in vintage memorabilia, collectors' stamps, and the occasional nostalgic blog post. Yet its rise and fall continue to echo in contemporary discussions about airline consolidations, labor rights, and the fragile balance between profit and people. Subscribe to The Collapse for more stories like this.